Alright, so we are going to learn about simplest form today. Simplest form is probably, like I said, it's the most important skill because you're going to have to me, it's harder than equivalent fractions. But with you guys being super good at factoring, you're going to be fine. But you're going to have to do a little work. If you're not willing to do a little work, it's going to be hard for you. So we talked about equivalent fractions. Remember, with equivalent fractions, the only thing that matters is what?
That whatever you do to the numerator, you have to do to the denominator and vice versa.
That you follow that golden rule. That's the only thing that matters. With equivalent fractions, it doesn't matter if you multiply or divide. You can do either one. With simplest form, it matters. Now, let me ask you this. In math, just kind of think of math. In math, if I tell you I'm going to make something simple, what do you kind of think I'm doing to that number? If I make it simple to work with.
Rounding.
Yeah,
It's
rounding.
easier to work with.
What do you think that I'm doing to the number? Rounding is a good question. I mean, a good suggestion. But let me ask you this. If I tell you to pick out a simple number,
It's a single number.
it's probably a single number, but not only is it single, it's probably what?
Prime.
You're thinking too hard.
Equal.
Halt. I think you're good, bud. I think you're good. I think you're good. All right, why you say 1 or 0?
Because they're neither.
They're first two numbers because they're very, very,
Even? Simple.
they're very small. So the first thing that comes to my mind whenever I think of simple numbers, I think of small numbers, right? Little numbers, right? Do you agree? Now, rounding was a good, like I said, that was a good suggestion. I'm just trying to get you guys thinking. When I think of simplest form, I'm going to think of making something easier to work with, right? Making it smaller. Now, equivalent fractions are fractions that name the same amount, right? Here's why this lesson is important. Now, most of the time, which after 4th grade I can tell you it'll be all the time, once we learn simplest form, all of your fractions must be put in simplest form. And we're going to talk about how to do that. So, we're going to take a few notes, so be ready to write because I don't want this to take long because we need to get some practice in. Now, simplest form is when, I should have printed out my notes so I can read it better off of my notes. Let me pull it up here. I want it to be exactly what I have here. Oh, up at the top, chapter 8, fractions. It's going to be outside lesson, you're going to write simplest form. I'm just going to have to read it from back here and remember it to go up there. This is the only thing I'm going to need help with though. Simplest form, we're writing on the top line, and this is going to, you got 2 lines for a reason, don't write big. Simplest form is when the numerator and denominator of a fraction. Simplest form is when, now I'm going to write big so hopefully you can see it. A numerator and denominator of a fraction, and don't abbreviate, write this out because this is important. One time I'll ask you to write it out. when the numerator and denominator of a fraction have no common factors greater than 1. 1's the only thing you can abbreviate. And that's the most you gotta write.
I almost fit all of it on the board. I fit all of it.
Alright, stay quiet though, because I still have people copying from the board. Alright, so simplest form is when a numerator and denominator of a fraction have no common factors greater than 1. And this is going to make sense in a minute. But I want to go ahead and get you thinking. With equivalent fractions, with all of your work on equivalent fractions, we were always looking at how many fractions?
2.
We were always looking at 2, right? We were seeing if fractions name the same amount, right? But with simplest form, if you read this definition, it's saying a numerator and denominator of a fraction. So equivalent fractions, we're dealing with 2, right, or more. But with simplest form, it's just what we do to one fraction, to our fractions, to all fractions. Okay? With me? All right, so sometimes simplest form may also be called, put it in a different color for you, lowest terms. Usually, now you'll usually see simplest form. But a lot of, I say older teachers, I don't consider myself old, but we use lowest terms and we use simplest form. So some of your work might say lowest terms, some of your work might say simplest form, but those two things, simplest form and lowest terms, are what?
The same.
What do we call those?
Vice versa.
Miss Elkins, it's going to be Miss Elkins' question. What are words that mean the same?
Synonyms.
Synonyms, there we go. Synonyms, close. Antonyms, the opposite. Synonyms, they mean the same, right? So simplest form, lowest terms. Now, the directions may say, instead of saying put the fractions in simplest form, it may say simplify, a verb. It may tell you to simplify. That's not a big stretch, right? Simplest form, simplify. Those are kind of similar, right? Or is it just me? They're kind of similar. But this next one's not. It may say to simplify or reduce. What does reduce mean today?
Make it smaller.
Very good, Kate. Reduce it. If we reduce a fraction, we're going to make it smaller. Now, if I just reduce a whole number, what am I going to do to it?
Make it smaller.
What operations? Good, I'm going to subtract it. But if I reduce a fraction, I'm going to put it in
Parentheses.
simplest form. So all these things can mean simplest form. Simplest form, simplify, reduce, lowest terms. With me? Pretty easy? All right, so here's our steps.
Put that one in green.
Well, I'm actually going to move it up for y'all. When simplifying a fraction, find the, now you can't write big on this, we've got to find the greatest common factor. Greatest common factor. And I want you to underline the G, the C, and the F. Because we abbreviate. That's a mouthful. Greatest common factor. GCF. You got to find the GCF. And so that's what we're going to put on our next line. The GCF is the greatest of the common factors of 2 or more numbers. Now it sounds confusing, but let's look at these words. What does greatest mean?
Biggest.
The highest, the biggest. So let's put biggest. What does common mean?
It means
Popular.
it's like
Popular.
It's more likely to happen. Or
More, yeah, it more likely. It happens
More often.
often, yes. So let's see. For common, let's put
More often.
oftenly happens.
let me see. I thought I put something good on here. That's not coming to me. Oh, I put this. Common is a shared interest, kind of like the same, right? Like a shared interest. Shared interest / same. So like, okay, if we share an interest, it's the same thing, right? Shared interest, same. Something you have in common. You both like gym. That's a shared interest. That's what you have in common, right? Dodgeball. All right. Now the last one is a factor.
Two numbers being multiplied.
That is correct, but we're going to put the other definition. What is it, Ryder?
A number being multiplied.
A number that can
A number that
can divide
will be divided.
a product.
We're just going to make it short. A number that will divide evenly. Really, it's divide another number evenly. I really don't want to leave that off. Let me put divide. I'll abbreviate. Another number, abbreviate evenly. Yep. Put what I put. Put what I put. Put what I put. Now, of course, you know Miss Moore likes her shortcuts and her tricks. And people get confused between equivalent fractions and simplest form. So in equivalent fractions, the most important thing you can do is follow that golden rule, right? With simplest form, the only thing you can do is make it smaller. So let's take a look at this. Your 3 steps to simplify fractions are going to be, first, find your factors. Your second step is going to be to circle V, G, C, F. And then your third step is the easiest to write down because it's just to divide. So I'm using a little bit of alliteration here. I'm going to ask you simplest form, and you say find your factors. If you can remember that, it's going to be easy so you don't get confused with equivalent fractions. Simplest form, find your factors. After you find your factors, you circle the GCF. And then after you circle the GCF, you divide. All right? I put an example down at the bottom, but that's for my people at home. I want you all to flip over to the back. Because here we go. We're about to put fractions in simplest form. This is a very, 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 very important lesson. You're going to be expected to know this from here on out. That's why 4th grade math is kind of a big deal. You learn how to do harder multiplication, like 2 digit by 2 digits, right? You learn how to do long division, right? And 4th grade gives you your basis for fractions. So I want to give y'all a good basis. I don't want y'all to even be confused. So before we put our fractions, our directions say, I'll tell you what, Ivy Kate, read our directions.
Write each fraction in lowest terms.
What does lowest terms mean for us to do to it? Simplest form. Simplify. Now first, you're going to write this. What's my first step? Find your what? Factors. Remember, use those else. Simplest form, find your factors. The second thing is to circle GCF. And then the third thing is to divide. I want you to write that at the top for me. Find your factors, circle the GCF, and then divide. All right, so now I think we are finally ready to get started. All right, so I'm gonna erase this and move this up. So look at number 1. All number 1 has out there is what? 4 tenths. You've got to simplify 4 tenths. So our first step to simplify is to find your factors. Everybody say it. Find your
factors.
simplest form. What does form start with? F. That alliteration, because it helps me too. Simplest form. The first step is to what?
Find your factors.
Everybody.
Find your factors.
Use that alliteration, that F, simplest form. Tell Mr. Gunn what's our first step?
Find your factors.
Good. You know, that's weird because I was thinking about that this morning. Yes.
She sent a message and she had a window. And she wanted to know when in that window we want to do it. Ms. Smith said the third grade, the week before spring break, maybe, or the week before that.
I think that's a really good time too because we're just hitting fractions and I feel like, of course, there's geometry and all. There'll be other things on there, but I would be happy with these fractions being on there because that's I think that's a great window.
She said, and I've got to look at Williams guy, community college,
Yes.
middle school. We might do it all go around the same time. But
I think that would be
before I
would be
reply
great.
to her with some dates on our window, put it in.
That would be definitely, and I might would even shoot for not the week before, 2 weeks before. That way, with absences and quarantines and whatnot, if we needed to make up, we would have
You'd
that
have a
whole
little-
week.
you'd have a
Yes.
little-
Because if we push it, then we're possibly
push it
having
too close,
kids. Yes.
You have
that
some
would
out
be
that
good.
you wouldn't have a chance to get.
Yes.
Like I see one that, there's an end, like you gotta do it before a certain
Before a certain
date, if you wanna get them back in time to
Gotcha.
produce.
Yes. Well, and I was just thinking about that because we were talking with the YES teachers about some of the students on the radar, and they asked for math, it's just harder. They said, well, what's their projected PL? And I said, well, it was this, but we also have not covered 95% of the skills. So it's kind of hard.
That's the reason why we would do another
Yes.
full one, so you can see
See.
what it was.
Yes.
And I'll look at the calendar and I'll fix it.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Probably sometime in the vicinity of.
That sounds good. I'd say whatever that deadline is, like maybe 2 weeks before, if it's before spring break,
I haven't looked at when the date she sent me, how that matches up with our spring break.
Gotcha.
I see where
To where it falls.
But I'll look.
All right.
And I'll look at the dates Ms. Guy already suggested for middle school and see how.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Gunn. All right, so back to simplest form. Simplest form. Oh, come on now. Simplest form.
Find your factors.
Everybody. Simplest form.
Find your
Alliteration
factors.
is when those words start with the same beginning sound, right? Y'all know that?
Yes, ma'am.
Simplest form, find your factors. Those F's, right? All right, so the first thing we're going to do is find our factors. This is what's going to cause a lot of you a pain because you're going to have to write your factors out on the top and the bottom. So here we go. Beside 4, put you some parentheses out there. They don't have to be really big. If you need to erase them, you can. But what we're about to do is we're about to find our factors of 4. Now, you should already be thinking how many factors you have. Are we going to have a ton? No. So your parentheses don't have to be that big. But we're going to go back to what we just reviewed. We're going to say 1 and 4. Then I'm going to say 2 and 2. Now, I'm
repeating, so you're done.
good. We're repeating. We're done. And I'm just putting 1, 2. I don't want to put 2 because I'm worried it'll confuse me. If you put 2 2s right there, it's okay. It's not wrong. But I'd love it if you got used to writing 1 because I think it will help you too. Hawk, stay with me. Now, we've got to write our factors for 10. So think about how big you'll need your parentheses. Like I said, if you're wrong, you can make it bigger. So right here, I'm going to say 1 and 2 and anything else? 3 doesn't work. 4 doesn't work. 5 is up there. All right, so I'm done. You just did the first step of simplest form. Congratulations, you found your factors. What's my next step?
Circle greatest common factor.
Circle your GCF, your greatest common factor. And that sounds really confusing, but look. Do you remember when Miss Moore said that there's a plan behind this? Why you're writing your numbers in order from least to greatest? Here it is. If you write them, if you factor your numbers the way that I told you to, keep those hands off that face. You start, if we're looking for the greatest, start down here where your big numbers are at. Go down. What's the greatest factor that both 4 and 10 have?
10.
No, they gotta both have it.
4 and 10.
No, they gotta both have it. 2. The greatest common factor means that it has to be up here and down there.
It's
So
like your
circle
golden
both of
rule.
them.
What?
Wait,
No,
no,
that's not your greatest.
your greatest. It's gotta be the biggest. And that's why I'm making you write them out, because what if you forget a factor? Usually the one that you forget is the one that you're gonna need to circle. Yes, ma'am, Kayla Jo?
Why do they both need to?
That's what I'm about to show you here. Well, let's think about this. Why would I want the same on the top as I have on the bottom, Colton?
Because both of the numbers are even and 2 is what makes.
True, but Darby, what were you gonna say? Well, think about what we learned yesterday, Kaylee Jo.
You have to do it to the top, bottom.
Bingo! Bump up, Kaylee Jo. I gotta follow the golden rule. If I do something to the top, I gotta do it to the
Bottom.
and if I do something to the bottom, I gotta do it to the So that's why I gotta circle both of them. Now, simplest form. Find your factors. Did we do it?
Yes.
Check. Did we circle our GCF?
Yes.
Check. Top and bottom. And now we're gonna what?
Goodbye.
All right, so look, I used to make my kids write out the whole thing, but I'm going to let you do a shortcut since you know your multiplication facts really well. Thank you, Miss Moore. We love you.
Thank you.
All right, so put your division symbol here, put your division symbol here. And your equal sign. So to get our numerator, I'm going to say 4 divided by 2 is?
8.
No, 4 divided by 2.
Oh, 2.
2. 10 divided by 2 is? So 4/10 in its simplest form is what? 2/5. 2/5. Now, it's easy, but here's where it can kind of get confusing. Divided by 2. Here's where it's going to get confusing. Or this is where it gets confusing if it is. Hang on. I just simplified it. So I made it smaller, right? I have to divide. With equivalent fractions, I could multiply or divide. But this is the thing. When you simplify, you get what kind of fractions?
Equivalent.
Equivalent fractions, because what did we follow? The
golden rule.
So, I simplified these, but you've got to know that when you simplify, if you simplify correctly, they should also be what?
Equivalent. fractions.
Equivalent. Because in math, we can change our numbers as long as we have a reason to change. Like whenever we decompose, we can pull apart numbers, but we got to pull them apart into their values, right? Well, whenever I simplify, I have to follow the golden rule. And anytime you follow the golden rule, you have just made what kind of fractions? Equivalent fractions. It's just here you had to simplify, which gave you what?
2/5.
What kind of fractions?
Equivalent.
4/10 and 2/5. If I give Parker 4/10 of the cake and Ryder 2/5 of the cake, guess what? They got the same amount. Now, let me ask you this. Individual pieces. Which one is bigger? 1/5 or 1/10? Which is the bigger piece?
2/5.
My 1/5 is bigger because remember, the larger the denominator, the
Smaller the piece.
good. You cut that pizza into 100 pieces, they're going to be little bitty, right? 100 is bigger, but since it's the denominator, it's actually smaller. And then if you just cut it into 2, they're really big, right? Yes, sir, Ryder, really quickly?
Isn't simplest form an easier way to get equivalent fractions?
Well, you get equivalent fractions anyways. It's not, you can use simplest form to get equivalent fractions. But if it asks for simplest form, this is the only way you can simplify, okay? Yes, sir, Parker?
Whenever there's an even number, can't you just divide by 2?
Yes, but I only want you to do that with big numbers. And back when we had a math, that was really great because they would give us really big denominators. And so we would start with 2 and then we would just keep going. But these are all going to be small. So write out your factors. But I do like you saying that, Parker. If you have even numbers, they can simplify, right? We can make them smaller because we know they're all going to divide by at least what number?
1.
All even numbers divide by?
2.
Good. Yes, okay?
What happens if the
You
number
better hurry.
Equal one whole, what would you do there?
Just put equal to 1. Equal to 1. And sometimes they'll do that, but not all the time with this. All right, so let's look at 4/12. So, simplest form. Oh, y'all left me hanging again. Do it again. Simplest form.
Find your factors.
Good. All right, so what are my factors for 4?
2.
1 and
1 and 4. 2 and 2. You're going to write these factors enough that you're going to know that your factors of 4 are 1, 2, and 4. And you need to write them out. Don't skip any. What are my factors of 12? 1 and 12. 2 and 6. 3 and 4. And I'm done because 3, then check 4, and it's already up there. The factoring is the hard part. If you can get the factoring, the rest of it is easy peasy. All right, so simplest form, find your
Factors.
Did we do that?
Yes.
Did we find all of them? Yes.
So now
All right.
you have to
Circle
circle your
your GCF. So start on the big end and go down.
4.
4. 4 is the biggest. Now look, they have 2 up there, but why can't we pick 2? It's not the greatest common factor. It's got to be the greatest. And I'll show you what happens when we don't pick the greatest in a minute.
It's gonna be wrong.
If
won't
you
get the right
leave it alone, it's going to be wrong. Yes, but I'll show you something. Now, so you circled 4. So after I find my factors, circle my GCF on the top and the
Bottom.
because of what rule?
Golden rule.
Golden rule of fractions. Now I got to divide.
4 divided by 4.
On the top, 4 divided by 4 is 1. On the bottom, 12 divided by 4 is 3. So 4/12 in its simplest form is 1/3. You also need to know that 4/12 and 1/3 are
Equivalent.
equivalent because I followed the golden rule. Good.
I thought it was gonna be like a lot fun.
Well, the hard part is your factors because we get really confident and then we leave a factor off or we accidentally pick the wrong one. Yes, Mom Ivy Kate?
Why couldn't we pick 2 different numbers?
Oh, you can't pick 2 because you got to divide. Remember? So I've got to divide it. So I couldn't divide by 2 and 4. I could only divide by 1. Now I do want to show y'all. Don't write this, but I want to go ahead and show y'all what would happen. So let's put it in red. So let's say that I have 4/12, and let's say that I didn't write out my factors and I just divide these by 2. What's 4 divided by 2?
2.
What's 12 divided by 2?
6.
What's the problem with 2 6?
It's
not equivalent.
No, they are equivalent because
It's a half. It's not its simplest form.
it's not in its simplest form because they still have a factor in.
GS.
They still have a common factor.
They need to do the GS.
They still have a factor in common. What number will go into both 2 and 6?
4.
Go into it.
4.
No.
Go into it.
1.
Yeah.
2.
2.
2.
2. What's 2 divided by 2?
1.
What's 6 divided by 2?
3.
So eventually you would get there. But I don't like that because you got to know when to stop. And that's hard because these are easy. We're starting out with easy ones. You're gonna get harder ones. Now, I want to show you something too. 1 second, Colton. The reason why I know that these are in simplest form is they only have one common factor. What's their common factor?
2. 4.
All right, look, hang on. Let me show you. This is what I'm asking. I know 2/5 is in simplest form because my factors of 2 are 1 and 2, right? My factors of 5 are 1 and 5. A fraction is in simplest form. That's what our long definition said. A fraction's in simplest form when our numerators and denominators only have what in common? Look up there.
That they're
The
prime.
the one.
The 1.
The one.
Now, they may not be prime. They may not. Both of those are, but they may not. They can only share what common factor?
The bottom and top. Wait, the
One.
1. That's when they're in simplest form. So look at 1/3. Is this in simplest form? Well, my 1 just has 1, and my 3 has 1 and 3. What's the only factor
One.
that they share? 1. Now, did it start out that way? No. But you always want to make sure that whenever you finish, you don't have anything in common, because if there's another number in common, you need to divide it again. Okay? Kind of like I showed you with the 4/12. So our goal to make sure our fractions are in simplest form is that they don't share a number other than what? 1. Now, see this fraction with a 1 on top? There's a name for this fraction. I want you to write it. Put an arrow at the 1. This is a unit fraction because it's as small as it could get. If you have a 1 on top, you know it's in simplest form because it can't get any smaller. Let me find what I did with my... Oh, there it is.
I want you to feed Drac down here.
Well, we will after the lesson because this lesson is super duper important, and y'all are going to have to do this on Excel, and it gets a little harder. So listen very quickly, hang on for it and take hands. All of my little magnetic fractions are going to have what as the numerator? Oh, you got to stop. You got to stop. You got to stop. You got to stop. What are they all going to have as their numerators? So all of these fractions that have a numerator of 1 is what? They're what kind of fractions? Unit fractions. Because they are the smallest part of a fraction that we can get. When you have a unit fraction, when you have a fraction that only has a 1 as a numerator, you know it's in simplest form. Because can I make 1 smaller? No, I can't. Alright, so moving on to the next one, because you're about to do some of these on your own. Let's look at number 3. Very quickly. Very quickly. Alright, so simplest form. What do we do? Find your factors. So what are my factors of 7?
1, 7.
Because we know 7 is prime. Write them out. Brooklyn, you with me? What are my... Excuse me. What are my factors of 14? 1 and... Then 2 and...
7.
Hmm?
Oh, yeah, never mind.
Now, hopefully,
Now you have to find your greatest. It's 7.
my GCF and my GCF start from this way. What's my GCF on the top and bottom?
7.
So let's circle it. Now what do I do?
Divide.
Divide. Equals to fraction bar. Alright? 7 divided by 7 is
1.
14 divided by 7 is
2. It's a half.
so 7/14 in its simplest form is 1/2. 7/14 and 1/2 are also
1
equivalent fractions. Now, there is a pattern to these fractions that simplify to 1/2. Kate, what is it?
If your even number can divide by 2 and get that number on.
True. I like to say if my top number is half of my bottom number. Like, what's half of 14?
7.
Alright, what's half of 16?
8. 7.
Alright, so hang on. Don't write this down, but I'm going to show you. Alright, so my half. So, if I had 4 on the bottom, what would have to go on top? If I had 6 on the bottom, what would have to go on top?
3.
If I had 8 on the bottom, what would have to go on top?
4.
If I had 10 on the bottom, what would go on top?
5.
If I had 100 on the bottom, what would have to go on top?
50.
So if the numerator is half, if you can divide the denominator by 2 and it's the numerator, you know it's equivalent to a half, right?
It's
All right,
like,
very quickly, Ryder, very quickly, because we are short on time.
Can't you just like subtract? the
No, don't, try not to subtract them. Try not to subtract them here. Yes, ma'am, Hallie Clay?
I forgot.
Okay.
So me and Parker said that if the bottom number is even and the top number is half of it, it would be 1/2.
Very good. That is it. That is it. All right, so we're going to do one more together, and you're going to do the rest on your own. What are my factors of 5?
1 and 5.
What are my factors of 15?
1 and 5.
1 and 15, 3
3.
and 5. All right, find your factors, then circle your GCF, greatest common factor. What's my greatest common factor? After we do that, then we what? Equal sign fraction bar. I go ahead and put that. What's my numerator?
1.
What's my denominator?
3. I mean, yeah.
So 5/15 in its simplest form is what?
1/3.
1/3. All right.